In this series, we talked about a lot of places in China, some you heard of, some you didn't. Well now, as we're very near the end, we get to talk about a piece of China that you definitely heard of – Tibet. What is it about this place that makes it so famous? Let's find out. Hi, my name is Sebastian and you're watching 7 Facts. This is probably the most controversial province of China. And there's been a lot of talk and debate on both sides, so I'll try as best as I can to keep it objective. So first things first. Tibet is also known as Xinjiang, and it's an autonomous region within the People's Republic of China. It has this special status due to its history as a sovereign state and a separate nation. We'll get to that in a minute. The region is huge. At over 1.2 million square kilometers, this region would be the 24th largest country in the world if it were independent. And yet, only 3.6 million people live here. If you do the math, on average, you'll only find 3 people per every square kilometer. Now that's a low density by any standard, but it's not really surprising, given that this is the highest region on Earth. That's right, the Tibetan Plateau averages out at 4,572 meters. Everest is also here, by the way, well, half of it because it's on the border with Nepal. Anyway, out of those 3.6 million, 90% are Tibetan ethnics, a group distinct from the Han Chinese that form the majority in the rest of the country. Tibet's current status is talked about a lot. So to understand what's going on and how we got here, we really need to talk about the history. The vast and harsh plateaus of Tibet have been inhabited for thousands upon thousands of years, well before our recorded history began. And while we do have artifacts of all sorts to prove that, it wasn't until the 6th century that we see the first written records of Tibet as an entity. The ancient kingdom of Zhangzhung is mentioned as the precursor of the later Tibetan kingdoms, and it was a culture that lasted for over 1,000 years, up until 625 AD. Once Buddhism reached Tibet, the first historical accounts begin from around the 6th century, and of a unified Tibetan empire a century later. In the centuries to come, Tibet's own flavors of Buddhism emerged, creating the 4 major schools of Tibetan Buddhism. In the meantime, the Mongols happened, and after they took over China and founded the Yuan dynasty, they also took over Tibet. Their control didn't last long though, but this interaction did help tremendously in the spread of Tibetan Buddhism to China. From the 14th century onward, Tibet was effectively an independent kingdom, ruled by various noble houses for 3 centuries. The Dalai Lama emerged as the political leader of Tibet in the 17th century when the Lama of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism became the head of state with the help of Güshi Khan and the Khoshut Khaganate. Don't worry, I'll explain the Dalai Lama too later in the video. Moving on, less than a century later, there was a conflict for power in Lhasa, which led to the invasion of the Khoshut Khaganate and the exile of the 6th Dalai Lama. This in turn prompted another Khanate, the Dzunga, to invade Tibet in 1717, who removed the Khoshuts and installed a 7th Dalai Lama. Their forces though terrorized the locals, and that led to yet another foreign intervention. China's Qing dynasty sent an expeditionary force to deal with the Dzungas. From that moment, in 1720, until the fall of the Qing dynasty, Tibet remained under Chinese control. Under the Qing, the Dalai Lama's role was mostly symbolic, and instead a council or kashag of 3 ministers ruled over Tibet. 2 years later, the Tibetans revolted, but the Qing forces defeated them and harshly punished the rebels by executing, in some cases, entire families. Expansion of control over Tibet continued, and the Chinese protectorate over the country became more firm. Nevertheless, it wasn't until 1903 that China officially and firmly claimed sovereignty over Tibet, and that was in response to a British expedition sent to Lhasa to establish diplomatic contact. Well, in truth, it was nothing short of a military invasion by British Indian armed forces to counter the ambitions of the Russian Empire. Rebellions, revolts, and another invasion by the Chinese began, the Dalai Lama was again deposed, and Tibet was on a path of sinification. But Tibetans had a stroke of luck. In 1911, the Qing dynasty fell and a period of de facto independence for Tibet began for the first time since 1720. Their independence, not recognized by China by the way, lasted until 1951. The newly founded People's Republic of China lost little time in asserting a new Chinese presence in Tibet, and once more Chinese troops were crossing the border. This was a weird time. Two completely opposite social systems came face to face, but for a while the Tibetans were left to their own devices. However, gradually reforms were put in place and resistance from the locals emerged. In 1956, armed forces began to rebel against China. This culminated with a full-scale military crackdown in 1959, and the 14th Dalai Lama had to escape to India. Since then, Tibet remained a Chinese province under the heavy scrutiny of Beijing. And this has led to some serious incidents and accusations and several waves of Tibetan refugees. Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, is a city like no other. Set in the Himalayas, it's one of the highest cities in the world with an altitude of over 4,000 meters above sea level. Lhasa is located in the south-central part of the Tibet Autonomous Region and has a population of around 300,000 people. It's a city with a rich history and has been the spiritual and political center of Tibet for many centuries. It's home to many historic and cultural sites, including the Potala Palace, which was the residence of the Dalai Lama until 1959. That might be the most famous landmark, but it ain't the holiest. The Jokhang Temple holds that place of honor, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the most sacred and important temple in Tibet. Great monasteries and pilgrimage sites dot the landscape, and that should come as no surprise. Tibet remains the most important patron and center of Buddhism to this day. Lhasa also has a pretty strong economy with a focus on agriculture, mining and tourism. The city is known for its high-quality wool and has a thriving handicraft industry. Tourism is also a major contributor. Lhasa attracts visitors from all over the world who come to explore its rich cultural heritage, breathtaking natural scenery, and spiritual significance. If you're planning a trip to Lhasa though, there are a few things you should know. First, due to its high altitude, visitors may experience altitude sickness, so it's important to take it easy and acclimate slowly. No, I'm not kidding, this is an actual problem. Also, be sure to respect the local culture and customs. Lhasa is a deeply spiritual city, akin to places like Vatican, Mecca, or Jerusalem, so visitors should be mindful of local traditions and practices. But most importantly, foreigners can't visit Lhasa or Tibet for that matter independently. You must travel with a guide, in private vehicles, not public transportation, and you can only go there through pre-arranged tours. No matter your beliefs or intentions, don't stray from these rules, unless you want to spend your vacation in jail. When talking about Tibet, we can't miss what is probably the most iconic landmark of the place, the Potala Palace. This magnificent structure has stood tall for over 1300 years and has been the heart of Tibetan Buddhism since the 7th century. The Potala Palace is a masterpiece of Tibetan architecture built on a hill right in the heart of Lhasa. It is made up of two main parts, the Red Palace and the White Palace, which together have over 1,000 rooms. The Red Palace is the highest point and is the spiritual center of Tibetan Buddhism. It houses the holy shrines, chapels, and the tombs of the past Dalai Lamas. The White Palace, on the other hand, was the political center of Tibet and was the residence of the Dalai Lamas. The Potala Palace as a whole is not just a religious center, it is also a symbol of Tibetan independence and culture. It was the official residence of the Dalai Lamas until Tenzin Gyatso fled to India during the Chinese invasion in 1959. Today, this place is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and attracts millions of visitors from all over the world every year. It is an important cultural and economic asset to Tibet, generating a significant portion of the region's tourism revenue. Try to remember that this is not just a physical structure, it is a symbol of Tibetan culture and identity. It has survived centuries of political upheavals, natural disasters, and cultural suppression, and stands today as a testament to the resilience and strength of the Tibetan people. Unfortunately, when it comes to Tibet, we have to talk about some bad stuff too. One issue that sounds good at first, but upon closer inspection is not quite great, is China's Comfortable Housing Program. This is a government-run program, part of a wider plan called the Build a New Socialist Countryside program. It's supposed to be a plan aimed at middle to low-income households that provides housing at an affordable price. While this is not out of the ordinary and China is certainly not alone in running such a program, in Tibet things went south a bit. To date, hundreds of thousands of Tibetan families who lived in traditional villages and had a semi-nomadic or full-on nomadic lifestyle have been forcefully relocated into permanent settlements. Furthermore, those living in households deemed substandard were required to dismantle their home or remodel them to government requirements, much of the expense being borne by the residents themselves. The effects of such a program on people with a nomadic lifestyle can of course be devastating, especially since many, if not most, have a set of agrarian skills, which is not necessarily a big help when looking for a job in a factory. There are of course those who underline the benefits of moving into modern households with proper infrastructure, but many view such forceful relocations as another attempt to undermine the Tibetan culture and way of life. And with that, we dwell a bit deeper into the issue of human rights within Tibet. Now, we have to establish some things. Prior to Tibet's annexation, the country was a theocracy. That is, the nation was ruled by clergymen in the name of a divine being and its laws. As such, the rights of human beings within Tibet were molded according to religious laws and traditions. To this, we add the fact that the traditional hierarchy of Tibetans was based on a caste system, and that included serfdom. All this to say that Tibet wasn't necessarily a role model of human rights prior to its incorporation into China. But even though Chinese authorities try to maintain a strict censorship, we do know that today things aren't going well. The Chinese Communist Party's official aim is to eliminate the so-called three evils: separatism, terrorism, and religious extremism. However, many critics, including international organizations like Amnesty International, state that such goals are used as a pretext for human rights abuses. To say that the judicial standards in Tibet are not up to international standards is a gross understatement. There are reports of the Chinese authorities within Tibet keeping political prisoners and prisoners of conscience, the ill treatment of prisoners including torture, inaction and ignorance in the face of said ill treatments, the use of the death penalty, especially extrajudicial executions, and even cases of abductions, forced abortions, and sterilizations. Of course, there is no freedom of the press in China, and that is especially true in Tibet, which makes it difficult to determine how much of the stories we hear are true or exaggerations. That being said, there is unfortunately no doubt and there is undeniable evidence that horrible things do happen to people in Tibet. I promised I'd explain what the deal is with the Dalai Lama, so here you go. A Dalai Lama is first and foremost a spiritual leader. The title is given to the foremost leader of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism. The name itself means Great Master or Guru. They are also considered to be the reincarnations of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. It is widely believed that Avalokiteshvara has a special relationship with the people of Tibet and guides them by incarnating as a benevolent ruler and teacher. The first one to hold the title of Dalai Lama was Gedun Drupa, who was named the Great Master after his death in 1578. The religious side of the story is fascinating in itself, of course, but you might wonder how the Dalai Lama became a political leader. Well, the fourth Dalai Lama was Yonten Gyatso, who was a Mongol ethnic, but more importantly was the great-grandson of Altan Khan, in turn a descendant of Kublai Khan, founder of the Yuan dynasty. This link attracted a strong support of Mongol leaders for the newest sect of Buddhism in Tibet, the Gelugpa sect. Long story short, the fifth Dalai Lama, Ngawang Lobsang Gyatso, benefited from Mongol support, specifically that of Güshi Khan. The Gelug became the primary school of Tibetan Buddhism, Tibet was eventually reunited for the first time since the Tibetan Empire collapsed 8 centuries earlier, and in 1642, the Dalai Lama was enthroned as the absolute ruler of Tibet. Nowadays, of course, as we all know, the Dalai Lama lives in exile. Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, is the leader that fled Tibet in the face of the Chinese invasion in 1959. Currently, he is still a spiritual leader, but in 2011 he decided to not assume any political and administrative authority anymore. Instead, the position of political leader in the Tibetan government in exile is now held by a Sikyong, a secular ruler elected through direct popular vote. And that was all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave. Leave your comments downstairs, and if you wish to do so, you can help out this channel through my Patreon page. I do hope to see you next time. Bye.